Portland, Oregon. Oh, how blessed I am. Oh, it's an honor and a privilege to be a small voice in the emergence of this historic institution. Portland, are you ready to get turned upside down? Are you ready for some revolutionary Christian spirit that will connect to your humanity in such a way that we can straighten our backs up and be a force for good, given the decay and the decadence that we see in our civilization? That's why I'm here. That's what the Cultural Soul Project is all about. And I want to begin by saluting my dear brother. Where he is? I want to look him in his eyes, because he's a special brother. He's got a singular spirit. He's been shaped and molded by a profound love. It connects the intellect and the spirit. And most importantly, he's got a backbone that is rooted in a grounding that allows him to persevere and endure in the midst of the grim catastrophe so many of our brothers and sisters of all colors are living in. I'm talking about Dr. Daymond Glenn. Give it up for this brother here. Give it up for this brother, my dear brother. And when you get as old as I am, it's a beautiful thing. It's a joy to see young brothers and sisters of all colors, but for me, especially the chocolate ones. All of us have equal status and equal significance, but to see the young black brothers and sisters connecting with the best of what has come before, using their creativity and sense of innovation and novelty, but still rooted in the best of the touchstones of those great freedom fighters who came before. That's what you see when you see this brother Glenn. And that's crucial. And let us not be deceived. There is no Daymond without his precious mother, Peggy. Please stand. Please stand. Please stand. Oh, yeah. And that's true for Maurice. That's true for Kareem. Both of y'all stand, too. Both of you stand. Both of you stand. Sly Stone says it's a family affair. It's a family affair. And it's Aunt, Sister Mary Williams, too. Stand, Sister Mary. And why is this so important to begin with this kind of revolutionary piety? Piety is not uncritical deference to dogma. It's not obedience that doesn't allow you to think for yourself in regard to doctrine. Piety is the acknowledgement of the sources of good in your life, in your short trek from your mama's womb to tomb. It can be veridical the way you and I would agree in terms of our Christian faith and the connection to a God. It could be horizontal, mom, dad, a teacher, a coach, a friend, a counselor, an advisor. We got to call into question any notion of Americans talking about us being self-made, as if we gave birth to ourselves, as if we taught ourselves a language, as if somehow we were cultivated all by ourselves. No, not at all. We are who we are because somebody loved us. Somebody cared for us. Somebody tended to us. Somebody sacrificed for us. And the question becomes, what are the ways in which we can pass it on when we have cultivated those kinds of gifts of love? And then here we are 91 years and 3 days ago, a Negro genius born in gut bucket Jim Crow, Georgia, named Martin Luther King Jr., tied to Alberta and Martin Sr., connected to Ebenezer Baptist Church, shaped by something bigger than him. Just like Brother Glenn, they are waves in an ocean. They're not isolated Negroes who are highly successful and can't wait to be part of the parade that allows people to think that, lo and behold, once they fit in, America's doing all right. No. We reject truncated, idolatrous American conceptions of success in which it's all about you and your talent. No, you use your success to be of service to those who are suffering, to the least of these, to the poor, the persecuted, the orphan, the widow, the fatherless, the motherless, the elderly, those in prison. Because somewhere I read that the greatest among you has nothing to do with Alexander the Great and Napoleon. It has nothing to do with the White House or Pentagon or State Department. It has to do with the quality of service that you render to the least of these. I don't care what color, what gender, what sexual orientation. I don't care what national identity. And this is a particular calling, is not just a career. That our brother Glenn's got a calling from on high. That here in Portland, one of the most vanilla of cities in the American empire, that we can still come together across color, across ethnicity and race, because there's a deep humanity that can connect us if we have the courage to make that connection rooted in a deep love. And Martin Luther King Jr. and Brother Glenn and a whole host of others, they are shaped by a tradition, a great tradition of a grand people of black people. For 400 years have been traumatized and can teach the world so much about healing. Terrorized for 400 years and teach the world so much about freedom. Chronically, systemically hated and teach the world so much about love. And we're losing that tradition. The market's taking over. Commodification's taking over. Commercialization is taking over. And we're experiencing one of the most profound spiritual catastrophes, which is the eclipse of integrity, honesty, decency, generosity, and empathy in this nation, in this democratic experiment, in this empire. And historically, black people have played a disproportionate role in the healing, in the talk about freedom, and especially in the talk about love. I could turn on John Coltrane's The Love Supreme and sit down and let it soak in every nook and cranny of your soul, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Or Stevie Wonder's Love and the Need of Love. Or Marvin Gaye's What's Going On? Who really cares? Or the Hutchison sisters in The Emotions. Now, I know some of the Vanilla sisters may not know them, but listen to them tonight. But James Baldwin's love-soaked essays. Love forces us to take off the mask. We know we cannot live within, but fear we cannot live without. That deep human level of love, not in the abstract, but a steadfast commitment to the welfare of others. And I come out of the prophetic legacy of Jerusalem, where our precious Jewish brothers and sisters characterize Hesed in Hebrew scripture. Hesed, that loving kindness. To be human is to spread loving kindness to the weak and the vulnerable. That shall be the measure of your greatness. It is a moral and spiritual greatness that is not reducible to worldly success. And to the degree to which we lose sight of vision and praxis, of integrity, honesty, decency, generosity, empathy, willingness to serve others, is a degree to which we lose sight of the raw stuff that keeps a democracy going. And the great John Dewey used to say, he was a secular brother. He used to say, show me a democracy that loses sight of integrity, honesty, decency, empathy, and a commitment to public life, that connects the spiritual and the social, that connects the existential and the economic, that connects the personal and the political, and I'll show you a democracy sliding down a slippery slope to neo-fascism. 2020, USA. Brother West, neo-fascism, what has that got to do with America? It's got everything to do with America. The rule of big money, big military, adventurous foreign policies, dropping bombs and drones on other people, too often innocent folk in various parts of the world. And Brother Glenn and I come from the same tradition. We went to Vacation Bible School. Pentecostal, I'm Baptist. We were told the kingdom of God is within us, and everywhere we go, we ought to leave a little heaven behind. When you leave heaven behind, you end up having to create a whole lot of hell on earth, because so oftentimes poor people and working people are rendered invisible, and therefore you are viewed as a troublemaker because you're cutting against the grain. You are not conforming to the world. You are in the world but not of the world. You are transforming that world owing to a spirit and a joy that the world didn't give you and the world can't take away. Never suffocating your love, no matter how hopeless it seems to be. Because hope is not an abstraction, it's a verb. It's action, it's movement, it's motion of souls and of collective persons together. And that's in part what we're here to talk about tonight. Portland has a fascinating history. I'm just looking at Sister Beatrice Morrow, her history, founding the Advocate, black newspaper in Chocolate, Oregon, against the Oregon Constitution that didn't allow black people to have legal residential status. He wanted to make it an all-chocolate affair. Very honest, but white supremacist to the core. The Klan revivals back and forth in the history of Portland. Walter Pierce's in the 20s and so forth. And then the white radicals like Brother John Reed, the white Sister Louise Bryant. When you talk about your witness, your vision, your analysis, it's got to be contextual. You see, I can't give the same speech here that I give in Philadelphia. My brother's from Philadelphia somewhere. Where is he? Where is he? There he is. There he is. Absolutely. I can't give the same speech that I would give in my hometown, Sacramento. And I don't know whether K.J. Jones made it or not, and Allison Jones. Are they here somewhere? There they are. Love y'all. I was with your parents last night. Stand up. Stand up. These are the Joneses. Special, just both of you. That's right. That's right. Love you. Thank you for coming. Living in Portland now. I was just with Kenneth and Penny. Known his parents for 50 years. We shut down the high schools in Sacramento 50 years ago when Brother Martin was shut down like a dog and said every high school going to have black studies, not because we want to be psychologically sensitive to people of color. Because we want love of the truth, and the condition of truth is always to allow suffering to speak. We want love of goodness over against any forms of evil. We want love of beauty, and there's no beauty that doesn't wrestle with forms of terror and trauma. That transfigures that pain and suffering into expressions, artistic expressions. And of course, the centrality of artists, and especially the musicians, who often, in many ways are the vanguard of our wretched and wonderful species, with all of our gangster proclivities and all of our humane possibilities. I want to try out 4 questions that are fundamental that we'll be wrestling with, and I think will sit at the center of the prophetic Christian practice of the Cultural Soul Project. was a love letter the great W.E.B. Du Bois wrote in the mid-1950s. He was just emerging, handcuffed, under near conviction with his beloved wife, Shirley Graham Du Bois. And he said, I've been struggling now for 83 years in America. He had moved from liberal to socialist to revolutionary. And that's a rare thing. Most folk who get older, they run out of gas, you know. Oh, yes. They start slowing down. Oh, we'll just let the young folk be revolutionary. I just need to learn how to fit in at this point. I've got compassion fatigue. And I just thank God that the prophetic Christian gospel is not ageist. It doesn't say, well, when you get older, you can become well adjusted to injustice. As you mature, you can become well adapted to indifference. No, not at all. I can hear Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel say, what a towering figure he was, best friend of Martin Luther King Jr. He said, indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself. I can hear William James say, the great American philosopher, indifference is the one trait that makes the very angels weep. W. Du Bois, student of William James, graduate of Harvard, class of 1890, just like John Reed from Portland, class of Harvard, class of 1910, same class as T.S. Eliot, poetic genius, reactionary, activist. We had to be able to keep track of both poles. Art is like that. We can learn from a variety of different figures. Even when you have deep disagreements, you got to be clear about where you stand. You see? And so one of the important things these days is to try to get fortified in relation to the love letter that I'm going to talk about with Du Bois. And this is very important because I know a lot of my young brothers and sisters who I love so dearly are preoccupied with being woke. Stay woke, stay woke, stay woke, stay woke, stay woke. I said, I don't want to suffer from insomnia. I don't want to stay woke all the time. No, you got to be a long distance runner when it comes to being on the love train, which means you got to be fortified. Shakespeare says readiness is all. It's the endurance and perseverance and the wrestling and what Jane Austen called constancy, a moral consistency. That is what is the fundamental measure of how you can use your gifts in such a way that you leave the world just a little better than you found it. So Du Bois writes, he says there's 4 questions for the younger generations, just written exactly for the Cultural Soul Project in Portland. How does integrity face oppression? Given our spiritual crisis, everything is for sale, everybody's for sale. All you got to do is dangle enough money, dangle enough visibility, dangle enough spectacle, and the substance drops out. We see this in our music. The black musical tradition, the greatest artistic tradition in the modern world in terms of its sustained wrestling with catastrophe and dishing out unbelievable creativity and love. What was it about those folk under white supremacist slavery that they could steal away at night in a ring shout, where it was against the law for black people to worship God without supervision, similar to the early Christians living under prosecution in a decadent Roman Empire? But raising their voices, lifting every voice, which is the very anthem of black people, saying, and when lifting our voice, and we're going to sing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. We're going to sing Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. There's a deep spiritual substance there There's a moral content there that has to do with integrity. Right now, we live in a culture where cupidity is dominant. It's love of money. The neoliberal soul craft is hegemonic. Smartness, dollars, and dropping bombs in foreign policy. So many of our young people these days, they think the name of life is to be the smartest and the richest in the room. That's precisely how you end up with a gangster that we have right now in the White House. Everywhere he goes, he thinks he's the smartest. He's got to be the richest. How spiritually empty can you get? How vacuous can you get? But he's a sign and a symptom. He's not to be fetishized and thinking that somehow when we push him out, that we can go back to business as usual. No, not at all. It's part of deep cultural practices that dishes out that kind of gangster. And let me be very clear about this. When I call somebody a gangster, I'm talking about an objective condition, not a subjective expression. You grabbing a woman's parts, that's gangster. You see another nation that has oil, you think you have access to it, that's gangster. When you lying 57 times a day, that's gangster. You putting children in cages, that's gangster. You demonizing my precious Muslim brothers and sisters and Mexican brothers and sisters, that's gangster. When you're lying on black people day in and day, that's gangster. Misleading workers of all colors as if somehow you on their side and you in the hip pocket of big money and big military, that's mendacious. And I speak in personal terms because I was a gangster before I met Jesus, and now I'm a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivities. So when I talk about gangster, I'm talking about something inside of me. I got to conquer it every day. All of us have some kind of evil proclivities inside of us. And if you think you're pure and pristine, just stand up so we can see your self-deception. But what is it that overcomes those kinds of evil proclivities? It's precisely the kind of love that Brother Glenn got from Peggy and the others, Reverend Walker and the others, the teachers and the others of all colors, colleagues and the others, friends and the others. And it's true, I was so glad you mentioned Shiloh Baptist Church, because the highest honor I've ever had in my life, as you know, is being the second son of Irene and Clifton. Dad is gone, Mama's strong. But Shiloh was fundamental in my formation. Fundamental. Reverend Willie P. Cook, he was a pastor. He was not a CEO. He didn't have a market model for church, which means that his prison ministry had more money than his building fund. Setting in place the programs and the services even before you have the ritual. That's a beautiful thing, brother. Do you know how rare that is today in the history of the Christian church? The Christian church, more and more in America, looks like the Roman Catholic Church in the time of Martin Luther. Commodification has set in across the board. So young folks say, oh, churches are just another pimp, another enterprise, another business. I see they got their strategy and tactic in place just to make big money. That's why they call themselves CEOs. CEOs have never been concerned about the souls of folk in their institution. They're concerned about profit making. They're concerned about money taking. They're concerned about buying and selling. Since when has the Christian gospel been subject to such massive commodification? There's a long tradition of it going all the way back. All the way back. And they forget that when that country boy, that Palestinian Jew named Jesus, finally made it into the urban context, from Bethlehem to Jerusalem, he went straight to the temple. And let us be very clear that the temple of that day was a combination of Wall Street, White House, State Department, Pentagon, Hollywood, and higher education fused together. And he ran them all out because they were manipulating and exploiting the poor. Now, see, you don't see that picture of Jesus on the walls of churches. No, it's too threatening, too much love. And then it's moved, pushed, ends up on the cross. And that cross signifies unarmed truth and unconditional love. So if you're not Christian like myself, just take the secular version. Unarmed truth. Who really wants to know the truth about ourselves, about the American empire? Whose land are we on? What is it? The Multnomah. Clackamas. How'd they get the land? How did Portland even get its name? Why is it named after Portland, Maine? It was almost Boston. You all know that. It was almost Boston. How you going to get two vanilla brothers naming something after themselves on somebody else's land? Doesn't sound too Christian to me. But they did it in the name of Christianity. Martin Luther King Jr. used to say, it saddens me that nobody really understood who I was. He said that 2 weeks before he died. Never understood who he was. Well, you're a civil rights activist. No, you missed the point. Well, you're a peace activist. No, you missed the point. I have been called by a God that has told me to bear witness to unarmed truth and unconditional love, and therefore I'm opting for integrity in the face of oppression, not cupidity, not venality, not just fitting in. And it meant then that when he died, the Poor People's Campaign, I was just with Brother William Barber there in Iowa. Wonderful brother. Magnificent brother, and Sister Liz too. Trying to bring together poor people of all colors because it's poverty, it's materialism, it's militarism, it's forms of xenophobia that lose sight of the humanity of so many people. It could be Jewish, it could be Arabs, it could be Muslims, it could be Palestinians, it could be Ethiopians, it could be Guatemalans, it could be Mexicans, losing sight of our gay brothers and lesbian sisters and precious trans, losing sight of poor people of all colors. He said, I want to bring together poor people across the board, and I have a critique of the American empire because a Vietnamese baby has exactly the same value as an American baby. I'm going to testify to that. Yes, Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black or white. They are precious in his sight. That's the kind of fundamentalist Christian that he was. He took that seriously in terms of the love ethic. Very much like the musicians. Very much like what you get in the Louis Armstrong solo when he hits that high C in West End blues. Or a Monk or Mary Lou Williams solo. That love that flows, and people are so surprised. How could it be that people are so naive to actually think that love of truth and goodness and beauty, and for those of us who are religious, love of the holy, can actually have any power and potency in such a nihilistic world in which there's so much power without morality. There's so much strength without sensitivity. What makes us think that we can actually change things? And Martin Luther King Jr., when he died, had 72% disapproval of fellow citizens and 51% disapproval of black folk. Oh, we forget about that. Everybody loves them now. You look what happens on Monday. Everybody comes running now that the worm's got his body and the Lord's got his soul. But no, he was the most dangerous man in America, FBI said, J. Edgar Hoover said. Why? Because he was bearing witness to a cultural soul project. Keep in mind, soulfulness is the sharing of a soothing sweetness against the backdrop of a grim catastrophe. That's what it is to be soulful. So it's not just a question of justice being what love looks like in public, but tenderness is what love feels like in private. So this is not say my name, say my name, say my name. No, this is a genius from Georgia named Otis Redden that said, try a little tenderness. Even Babyface said it's tenderoni. That's what James Baldwin said about Malcolm X. He was the most gentle and tender person I ever met. And so many vanilla brothers and sisters say, how could it be? How could Malcolm X didn't have a tender bone in his body? Every time he spoke, he was so mad, and he was coming at us, especially in his early stages when he said we were devils. Well, he was wrong. He was talking about your devilish behavior. No, white folk not devils, but like any human being, you got some devilish proclivities. But what is it about that tenderness? What is it about the gentleness? What is it about the kindness? What is it about the sweetness? It's the soulfulness. Soulfulness. And there's no accident in our highly money-driven cultural industry. It's hard for our young people to gain access to a music that has the soulfulness and the tenderness of a David Ruffin singing lead with the Temptations, or Russell Tompkins Jr. singing lead with the Stylistics, or Ted Mills with Blue Magic, a Don McPherson, a Cuba Gooding with main ingredient. And we ain't even got to the Four Tops yet. We ain't got to the Miracles yet. We ain't got the Midnight Star. We ain't got the Atlantic Star. We can go on and on. Why is it that we don't have groups that come together and sing with tenderness so they touch the souls of folk rather than just titillate the bodies? It's spiritual warfare against young people, especially young black people. Keep them so on the defensive, tough all the time, posing and posturing as if somehow life is all about titillation and stimulation rather than deep care and nurture, so you lose access to the very experience of intimacy and vulnerability and invincibility, which is the very source that allows you to straighten your back up. Oh, yes. And see, Martin Luther King Jr. came out of a tradition of a people who had been niggerized for so long. Efforts of niggerizing black people to keep black people so afraid and scared and intimidated, scratching when it don't itch, laughing when it ain't funny, just to be accepted, can't wait to be patted on the back by the establishment so you get your carrot and get access to your success, and you're still scared, you don't want to speak the truth, you don't want love to flow. Martin Luther King Jr. used to say, Jesus deniggerizes black people, takes that fear out of you. Don't have to walk around smiling all the time. Don't have to act as if that rage inside of you is not something real, making you think somehow you the one out of touch rather than the folk who are pushing you to the margin. That's freedom. That's truth. The truth shall make you free. And the only way you undergo freedom at its deepest level is to learn how to die in order to learn how to live. Socrates understood that when Plato used to say philosophy itself, love of wisdom, is a meditation on a preparation for death, because the only way in which you can learn how to grow is to ensure certain assumptions and presuppositions you have are killed and murdered, and they must die in order for you to emerge as a more mature, caring, critical person, thinking for yourself, loving for yourself, fighting for yourself and others. That's the connection between truth and freedom. And we used to look to the musicians for that. And there's still some. We got Brother Kindred and others around. That tradition is not dead, but it's weak and feeble. When I hear hip-hop artists saying, I don't write for the rhymes, I write for the... You all remember that line of Diddy? I write for the cash. Can you imagine Curtis Mayfield, who was told never to go to the SNCC rallies because somehow they said, lo and behold, your consumers and customers may view you as too political, and he just write, we a winner anyway. He write choice of colors anyway. He write keep on pushing anyway. Mighty, mighty, spade and whitey anyway. That's Curtis Mayfield, genius of geniuses. Coltrane was told never to go to a Malcolm X lecture. He's sitting on the second row with his horn. How come? I'm trying to wrestle with truth and goodness and beauty, and I need to hear what people are saying. I need to engage the world in my own voice. And that lifting of voice is not lifting echo. And all we have these days too often are these echo chambers, and people think they're really speaking in their own voice. No, not at all. You're just an extension of an echo chamber, given the polarization and balkanization in our culture, given the corporate media that's teaching us more and more to hate each other so they can make big, big, big money. And none of them want to deal with war. They don't want to deal with militarism. They don't want to deal with the 61 cents for every dollar that goes to the military-industrial complex. They don't want to deal with the deep ways in which Wall Street still dominates our economy. That's the common bipartisan consensus that undercuts the little narrow, truncated, neoliberal, reactionary, neo-fascist right wing, and the little milquetoast neoliberal so-called left wing is nothing but centrist and moderate to the core. What does that have to do with the Christian gospel? Everything. Because for those of us who are committed to that blood at the cross, I'm not talking about the commodification of the churches that transform that blood into Kool-Aid. And that's what's happening in so many of our churches. That blood has been translated into Kool-Aid, so people just want to dip in and get their blessing. They want to pray as a petition. Gimme, 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 gimme. Rather than God, give me the strength to love to climb this mountain. So once I climb, I feel a strength that I didn't think I had. There's sources available to me I didn't know about. And it's horizontal and it's vertical. You see. That's what is so significant about what is going on here in Portland. Now, it's true, a lot of people in the country haven't got the memo yet, Brother Glenn. But, when you open in the fall, and I can't wait to come back. Anytime you call me, I'm coming back. Now, I'll fly back unaided. Oh, I'm coming back. Because anywhere folk are loving the wretched of the earth, anywhere folk are concerned with taking a stand, anywhere folk are bringing folk together in the name of integrity and the honesty in the face of deception. That's the second question of Du Bois. And the decency in the face of insult in the third question of Du Bois. And courage in the fate of brute force. Because let us be very clear that in the history of this nation, anybody who falls in love with poor and working people is subject to character and maybe literal assassination. And in a white supremacist civilization, black love is a crime. Black freedom, it's a pipe dream. Black history is a curse. And black hope is a joke. And the question becomes, what are the countervailing forces that the cultural soul project provides that says black love, though criminalized, cannot be eliminated? You see? And when you really love folk, I don't care who you are, you hate the fact that they've been treated unjustly. If you really love folk, you loathe the fact they've been treated unfairly, and if you don't say something, the rocks are going to shout out. And I believe in charitable Christian hatred. I'm going to end on this. I know we got dialogue coming. And I'm in no rush. You can see that. Now, we're going to stay as long as you like. I go with the Spirit. I'm not on calendar time. I'm here in Portland. We stay as late as you want. My plane doesn't leave until 6 o'clock back to California. We stay till 4:30. I grab a little water. It's too late for cognac. I'm a Baptist, not Pentecostal. Oh, I'm just messing with you. I'm just messing. No, Sister Peggy, you know I love you. You know I love you. I love you. I couldn't say that in front of my mama too often either. You know what I mean? But that's the kind of Jesus-loving free black man I am. Complicated. But most importantly, we have to be willing to pay a cost and bear a serious burden. But we need to do it with joy. One of the worst things of our culture is the reduction of joy to pleasure. So the culture becomes a joyless quest for insatiable pleasure. Get all the pleasure you want and still feel so empty. But there has to be joy in struggle, joy in loving the truth, joy in serving and sacrificing. And there's nothing wrong whatsoever with admitting that at times you are overwhelmed with despair. The great Goethe used to say, he or she who has never despaired has never lived. Nothing wrong with wrestling with despair, just like Jacob in the 32nd chapter of Genesis, wrestling with the angel of death in the midnight hour, emerging with a new name, God Wrestler. New energy, new vision, new possibilities. We just have to ensure that despair never, ever has the last word. It has to be a brook of fire through which we must pass. And that's in part what the cross is about for Christians. That Roman Empire trying to crush that Palestinian Jew named Jesus. To snuff out those particular folk who are tied to the way. That was the first name of Christians. The way, associated with what? Love. And by the fruits you shall know them, by the scope and breadth of their love, their willingness to engage in forms of life that are committed to the steadfast welfare and well-being of others. And it is always when you opt for integrity, honesty, decency, courage, cutting against the grain. Not in the spirit of self-righteousness. We must learn from one another. Humility is always a benchmark of moral and spiritual maturity. No place for arrogance, no place for condescension, because it's in the humility that we're able to get empowered, because we're gaining access to a variety of other voices, including our own. And that's the only way we're going to be able to sustain any possibility, spiritual or social or economic or political. With democratic ends and aims, and democracy is the empowerment of those James Cleveland called ordinary people. And all of us are ordinary. If you on your way to the culinary delight of terrestrial worms, you are ordinary. And emerge when your mama's womb, you are ordinary. But all of us have extraordinary possibilities. It's a profound democratic sensibility, you see. And let us be very clear that democracies are very fragile and they come and go. And those who are afraid of mixing religion with politics don't understand that if you think your religion is unmixed from politics, that's a very political statement. Politics are inescapable, but there are other dimensions. Love is not reducible to politics. It's not reducible to friendships. It's not reducible to what kind of music you love. You see? But politics is inescapable. But it's your spiritual and moral witness that has political consequences. That's what the Cultural Soul Project will enact and embody. And it's going to serve as a catalyst for a spiritual awakening, a cultural renaissance, social motion and momentum, and we hope even social movement as it has solidarity with those wrestling with ecological catastrophe, concerned about economic injustice and escalating levels of wealth inequality, concerns about patriarchy and vicious treatment of our sisters of all colors, critiques of foreign policy that says, yes, a baby in Kashmir, in Tibet, a baby in Palestine, in Gaza, has exactly the same value as a baby in China, in India, in Tel Aviv. A universality of vision, but is also understanding forces for good that are up against the powers that be. So I tell you, Portland, you better get ready. You better get ready. Something is happening in this city, and as the various forces coalesce and as the Cultural Soul Project becomes one fundamental set of voices alongside other voices, we might be able, in fact, to keep alive the best of that grand legacy of not just Martin Luther King Jr., but all of those prophetic figures who came before. The Rabbi Heschels, the Edward Zaids, the Dorothy Days, the John Reeds, the Emma Goldmans, the Harriet Tubmans, the Aretha Franklins, all using their gifts in kenosis. And what is kenosis? Self-emptying, self-offering, self-giving. When Martin Luther King Jr.'s body was in that coffin, the doctor said he had the body of a 65-year-old. He was only 39. He had given everything. Service at the center of one's life. It's one of the great gifts at our best of black people, even though Rembrandt is kenosis on the canvas. He gives everything in keeping track of the humanity of his subjects. That's what we need. Do we have what it takes, Portland? We shall see. You got a rich tradition, and you got a lot of cousins who are not yet convinced. Let us see, let us work together. Thank you all so very much.
Oh, you're going to take the first seat. You're perfect.
No, you sit here.
This your water.
You sure?
Yeah.
All right.
Testing.
All right.
You guys got my mic? Wow. Give it up one more time for Dr. West, y'all.
Oh, thank you so much. You're very kind.
Testing. So, first of all, I want to, and you have some water on your side.
Oh, thank you so much, my brother.
Right. So, I want to say a couple things. And Dr. West was so eloquent and so judicious in talking about the capacity of what we as a church can do at the Cultural Soul Project. And I want you to keep fall 2020 on your radar for our church services. But between now and the fall, we're going to offer a lot of other programs and services that we think can help us build community and really wrestle with the profundities of what Dr. West is talking about. So when we close, I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but I just want to let you know, this year is about ministry, engagement, and outreach. And we want you to understand that what we do through the legal clinic, what we do through the counseling center, what we do through our community education, that is our ministry as well. So yeah, I just want to say a couple things as well. It is my prayer and my hope that in your own individual life, you get an opportunity to meet someone who has left an indelible mark in your mind, in your soul, and in your heart. I have a top 5 list of people I've always wanted to meet and be in conversation with. And I didn't get a chance to meet Dr. James Cone. He passed away.
Oh,
he was my top 5, Dr. West.
Oh my God, yes. My
But
God, yes.
Dr. West was definitely in my top 5. And if anybody knows Jay-Z and can make that happen, that would be, I think I've had everybody. You know, Dr. West,
I do. I love my lyrical genius. I just try to keep him accountable, but that's another lecture.
Yeah, that's a whole nother lecture. But come to the community education class. We'll talk about that in the NFL and Rock Nation and corporate interests. But so I want to start the conversation off with the prophetic gospel. The interesting thing about Dr. West's lecture, it's almost like, what more is there to say? You know, in the words of Jay-Z, what more can I say, right? But I do want to engage him in some of these major tenets of the church, because the foundation of what we do is through the lens and through the spirit and through the work of Dr. West. So Dr. West, let's talk about this first tenet. Yes, so the first tenet of our church is the prophetic gospel of Christ. And allow me to be a bit loquacious to kind of frame the context, and then I'm going to give you the alley for the oop. So this idea of the prophetic gospel was very important when we started the church, because we knew we wanted to do things around kind of critical hip-hop theory. We knew we wanted to do things around a critical theory on race, and we're going to talk about what that means and what that looks like. We knew we wanted to do a lot of community engagement. And a lot of people who were kind of constituents of what the Cultural Soul Project became were saying, you know, you got all this stuff going on with the law clinic, you got this stuff going on with the education, you got this. How about you create a nonprofit? And then one of the tenets of the nonprofit is the church. And I said, absolutely not. I'm not called to be an administrator of a nonprofit. I'm called to be the church. And I said, I want everything that we do to sit underneath the church, underneath what we call the prophetic gospel. And that's why when you look at even our logo, the Cultural Soul Project, people see the CSP, but it's that cross right in the middle, that everything sits under that cross. And so for us, this is what the prophetic gospel is. And I want to see if this makes sense, if it rings a bell to you. So the prophetic gospel for us, and you all can read about this on our website, theculturalsoulproject.com. That sounded very corporate. I'm sorry about that. It's just trying to direct you all in the right direction.
You want to communicate.
Yeah, you got to communicate.
You got to communicate, though. That's right.
So our first thing about the prophetic gospel is speaking truth to power. Then we talk about allowing suffering to speak and reshape the agenda of those in power. Then we talk about centering the voices of people who have been shaped by life on the margins, what the Bible calls the least of these, and making their plight and predicament fundamental to and a central focus of the gospel. And then we talk about responding to your contemporary moment in terms of what it can and should be, and not allowing the current circumstance to dictate your responses to it. And when I was reading a lot about Dr. West, again, I told you, I kind of fell back from a lot of the theory and the philosophy, and I wanted to know what was going on in the soul and what created the mind that we all were just blessed with today. And Dr. West said there was 3 things that grounded him in terms of his own spiritual development. Number 1 was family, right? So when you hear him talk and you see how he honors my mother, you see how he honors my family, family was important to him. So it's 3. The second thing, he talked about this kind of Socratic spirituality that was on search and seeking for truth. And the third was this Christian spirituality that was about bearing witness to love and justice. And I had to write this one down because I didn't want to miss it. You talk about Martin Luther King so much as one of the most significant organic intellectuals of our time. And for you, propheticism is highlighting systemic and social analysis of the circumstances under which tragic people struggle. For people that don't understand what the prophetic gospel is and all the things we just talked about, help people understand why it's so important for a prophetic and radical gospel to center the voices of people and allow suffering to speak.
No, I appreciate that, though, brother. Appreciate that. Well, one is, there's a powerful text on this. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel has a book on the prophets, and he talks about the call, a call that has to do with a reorienting of one's self and soul that is driven by a hypersensitivity to the suffering of others. So that one of the big differences, for example, between Socrates and Jesus, Socrates argues but never sheds a tear. Jesus weeps. Why does Jesus weep? Because of the hypersensitivity to the suffering of others, the death of Lazarus, the condition of Jerusalem, and so forth. So that all the Socratic energy in the world, critical questioning, so important, that is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. Because tears is the shattering of the numbness. Tears doesn't allow your conscience to become coarsened or your heart to become hardened or your soul to become chilly. That's that indifference and callousness that I was talking about. But I would add one thing in terms of speaking truth to power. See, I think trying to speak and live the truth to anybody, so that includes speaking truth to the relatively powerless. It's not as if anybody is just born with access to the truth. And no human being has possession or monopoly of truth, capital T.
That's right.
Because we're all fallen and finite. You see. But speaking the truth, doing the truth, trying to be truthful is a way of being in the world that can be empowering and ennobling. Yeah. And one of the things that we oftentimes overlook these days is thinking that somehow just speaking a truth to an entrenched status quo is enough. No, you got to be able to connect with the folk who are being dominated to get them to have a consciousness and a soul orientation to take a stand. And that's very difficult because there's a lot of sleepwalking out there and people are just afraid. They're scared. The fear is overwhelming. And people, the powers that be, manipulate the fear. They divide black folk against white folk, against red folk, against indigenous folk, against yellow folk. They don't want that kind of solidarity because if that solidarity comes together, it's a threat for the elites at the top. Keep them scared. Keep them separated. Divide and conquer in that way. So the truth speaking that you were talking about,
I love that.
It's got to be one that cuts right across the board. And let me say this, the great Reinhold Niebuhr used to say, any justice that is only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice. So it's not just a matter of talking about justice or saying, I'm concerned about justice. No, you got to have a love, concern, and care about the people who are being treated unjustly.
That's right.
Those are not synonymous. Because you can have folk who have a rigorous, sharp analysis that don't have enough love in their soul and care in their heart. And without that love, it's sounding brass and tinkling cymbal.
That's right.
You're not going to be a long-distance runner. You're not going to be a marathoner. That's why you run into a lot of folk who just come out sprinting, talking about justice, and 10 years later, they so well adjusted to the establishment, living high, obsessed with status, ambition, power, wealth. And you say, what happened? It wasn't enough love. It wasn't enough deep concern and care that allowed that consistency that we were talking about. And so in that sense, justice and love are indivisible, but they're not identical. They're not identical. And the love at this deeper level, love of neighbor, the love of truth and so forth, but also for Christians, love of enemy. You see, and that's where my charitable Christian hatred comes in. You see, when we were taught to love the sinner and hate the sin, hate the injustice, and still try to stay in contact with the humanity of the people who are perpetuating it, because they can still undergo change and transformation. And no matter how woke anybody is, you wasn't always that woke. You had some sleepwalking going on in your life too. And look how you changed. Look how you underwent transformation. Look how you underwent metamorphosis, you see. So it's not a matter of canceling folk out. I know they use that phrase. Cancel culture. Absolutely. Yeah. But you do have to bring serious accountability to bear. And when you speak truth to the folk you love, I mean, I encountered that with during the years of my dear brother Barack Obama. So, oh, Brother West, you hating on Obama when you talk about his connection to Wall Street and dropping 523 drones in Libya and Somalia and Afghanistan and Pakistan and assassinating 3 American citizens with no due process. Why you got to hate on Obama? I'm not anti-Obama. I'm anti-injustice. Anti-injustice. I don't care what color the president. I want to protect him against vicious white supremacists in Fox News who lying on him all the time. But you have to also recognize that it's bigger than him, just like it's bigger than us. It's about the children dealing with decrepit schools and inadequate housing and low-quality education and mass incarceration regimes and the new Jim Crow. Can you imagine a president, 1948, black man get elected and can't say a word about Jim Crow?
That's right.
So you get a black president, hardly say a word about the new Jim Crow until the 7th year. You say, hey, what's going on? Well, we have some constituencies in the middle, and we don't want to move too quick. Too quick? You only got 1 year left. What are you talking about? When you met with Wall Street and you told them, I stand between you and the pitchforks, but I will protect you, and how many Wall Street executives went to jail? 0. All of that gangster activity on Wall Street, insider trading, market manipulation, predatory lending, fraudulent activity, not one Wall Street criminal goes to jail. And you can't raise a critical voice because he's a black president? Please, I was born at night, but not last night. Come on, please. Oh, you just jealous. Jealous about what? You want to get in the White House. I want to get in the White House. Shoot, I'm trying to keep my distance from the crack house. Going crazy with folk not loving the folk enough to tell the truth. Powers that be and the folk themselves who have relatively less power. I don't believe anybody is absolutely powerless. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Our Jewish brothers and sisters in concentration camps could still get together and create orchestras with beautiful music. That's a form of spiritual and artistic power in a situation of overwhelming institutional powerlessness. Right now in Gaza, they still raising their voices. Overwhelming powerlessness, but they still got spiritual and cultural power. Same was true with the enslaved Africans, with the spirituals and so forth. Absolutely. So that this sense of relative powerlessness, relative powerfulness, and then trying to ensure that we can create movements that keep track of what you always acknowledge in your powerful lectures. And I try to keep track of you, brother, because you're an inspiration. But when your critiques of diversity and so forth, the structural and institutional causes of these legacies of white supremacy and male supremacy that are always grounded in the political economy and the nation state. So race is not some kind of trans-historical factor that it's over and above the economy, over and above the nation state and politics, over and above the policies. It's intertwined in that way. Right. And that means you have to talk about economic injustice. You have to talk about class. You have to talk about economic inequality. Right. But to talk about those issues means you're going to get in even more trouble. Oh,
that's
yes,
right.
You got to, yeah, absolutely.
Dr. West, there's a couple things. I want to maybe come back to these. I want to talk about, this is not the question, but I want us to maybe circle back towards the end on how Christians don't have the monopoly on the truth. Oftentimes, we as Christians feel like we have a particular dogma and everybody needs to see through the same lens that we see things through. And I think one of the things that you've said in so many of your talks and so much of your work is how Christians don't have the monopoly. We don't have a monopoly on truth. We have a perspective, and as long as it's aligning with the building of other folks, it kind of has a resonance. But I want to move us just a little bit because there are a couple things I want to make sure we hit. And I want to talk about the second tenet of our church. We call it a critical theory on race.
Yes.
And we particularly don't call it a critical race theory. Now, it has, some connections and some intersections and some overlap with critical race theory, but we don't specifically talk about, interest convergence or whiteness as property or some of the, kind of standards of the critical race theory. Mm-hmm. But one of the major things we take out of critical race theory, a critical theory on race, our tenet is the centrality of race and racism in our society. So we kind of frame this, at the church, we kind of frame the centrality of race and racism in our society and how it's kind of woven into the normal and everyday fabric of our social life. And as a result, we bring forth a critique on the social construction of whiteness as an ideology that is interest-bound, and it really kind of moves to advance and protect its own interests. But we don't stop the conversation with just race. So we have a critique on any socially constructed ideology that benefits itself at the expense of others, and it only operates to serve and advance its own interests. So if your maleness is doing that, we got a critique on that, right? Absolutely. So if your sexual identity is doing that, we have a critique on that.
That's right.
So, but one of your most favorite lines out of your book, Race Matters. Raise your hand if you got Race Matters. I read Race Matters.
Oh, right. Lord have mercy.
Dr. West has one of the most amazing lines in the book, Race Matters. And I remember reading this when I was an undergrad. And it kind of really reshaped how I thought about diversity and thought about multicultural work, whatever the nomenclature of was at that time. This is what you said, and this is what he says in his book. He says, because of the wounds and scars suffered in a white-dominated society, black folks have a deep-seated anger, a boiling sense of rage, and a passionate pessimism around America's will to justice. And I remember reading that, and I was like, this is profound. Because there's always skepticism and cynicism when white, socially constructed ideology becomes the arbiter of what we as people who have been shaped on life on the margins receive, right? Mm-hmm. So my question to you is, and this is an important one for me and for the church, how can we have a critique on the social construction of whiteness as an interest-bound ideology, but do it in a way that we decenter whiteness and we don't fetishize that ideology as a practice? That's my question for you.
Yes, no, it's a wonderful question. I mean, one thing to keep in mind is that there is a rich tradition of vanilla brothers and sisters who have fought against white supremacy. Mm-hmm. That's very important. Mm-hmm. Very important. Mm-hmm. So that anytime you're just talking about whiteness in the abstract, then associated exclusively with subordination, then there's no room for John Brown. There's no room for Ann Braden. There's no room for Miles Horton. There's no room for a whole host of folk, you see. So that it's true that, the vast majority of white brothers and sisters were not part of the black freedom movement. But those who were willing to have intense uncomfortability at Thanksgiving dinners with their families and be viewed as in-lovers, they must count. Which means, again, that whiteness has to be always viewed through the prism of the choices made by human beings who are constructed as white, and also through the prism of the particular movements that they have generated, be it the abolitionists in the North, because, the initial abolitionists, of course, were the enslaved people themselves. They were at the center of it all. You see, so a lot of times, the very narrow historians say, well, the abolitionist movement was the Quakers and the Mennonites. We love the Quakers. We love the Mennonites. But they came second. The enslaved folk wanted the freedom before they got to the point. Right. And that's very important. That's very important. But part of the problem of talking about whiteness is that because white supremacy has been so ubiquitous in the shaping of the nation, and let us never say that the enslavement of African people was America's original sin. You get that in the neoliberal chatter on corporate media all the time. It was the treatment of indigenous peoples. And when you start there, you see that America was an empire before it was a democratic experiment. It was access to land and resources and gold and so forth. Look at the history of the gold rush for this particular city. And then the enslavement of African peoples. Both of them barbaric, but it's not a matter of slavery was America's democratic deficit. Without slavery, would have been such a magnificent democratic experiment. No, you're missing the point. We're missing the point. So that precisely because white supremacy is so pervasive, it's hard not to center it because it's played such a disproportionate role in shaping the destinies of the whole nation. Not just black people and brown people and indigenous, of the whole nation. You see. And yet, if we keep it at the profound human level, and this is where the challenge is. Yeah. You see, the very notion that white brothers and sisters are on a human continuum with everybody else is not widely embraced. That's why a lot of white brothers and sisters, they say, well, we love Martin, but Malcolm was just so hard on us. Well, sometimes it's not just all about you. Sometimes it's just not all about you. He's going to get around to your humanity, but he's trying to work some things out. But when black people are told, we ought to love George Washington because you have to be sophisticated and complex and understand he's the founding of the nation, even though he was enslaving your descendants, we're supposed to just move quick. Or Thomas Jefferson, or James Monroe, or most of the chief justices for the first 79 years in the founding of the nation, or the slavery under the U.S. Constitution, a pro-slavery document in practice. We're supposed to love that document. You just ask white brothers and sisters, well, if there was a black supremacy and you were enslaved under a constitution, you think you'd be in love with that Constitution across the board the way we're taught in civics classes? Because when you make it about them and say, oh, no, that sounds like fascism to me. Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Sounds like terrorism to me. Yes, it was. Yes. If you had white brothers and sisters who were lynched every 2.5 days for 50 years, someone with the U.S. flag wrapped around their bodies, and then you had a football player who wanted to stay on his knees when he saw the flag, you'd have a different orientation, different perception. Put yourself in somebody else's shoes. It's not always about you. Right. That's not an excuse for Malcolm X saying that white brothers and sisters were devils. He's wrong to say they're devils. But what he's trying to deal with is the white supremacy inside of him. Because if we had nothing but black people right now in this room, we still have a whole lot of white supremacy because it operates in the souls of black people. That's right. We don't have to have white brothers and sisters around for white supremacy to operate. That's right. Because we've been shaped in a white supremacist civilization. We've been told we have less intelligence, less beauty, less character. The wrong hips and lips and noses and skin pigmentation and so forth. All of that self-violation and self-hatred that's been inscribed deeply within black people. And if it wasn't for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, what Elijah Muhammad put right on the front of the newspaper? Islam dignifies. That's his way of saying Islam deniggerizes. But he took it in such a way that it didn't have the same scope of love that a Martin Luther King Jr. had. The love was confined to the chocolate side of town. And so we call that into question. But we also say it's hard to conceive of ourselves. And by ourselves, I'm talking about any freedom fighter in the 20th century. It's hard to conceive of ourselves without Malcolm X. Why? Because he did something that's very rare in America. He said what he meant, and he meant what he said. See? No posing, no posturing. So when he changed his mind, he changed his mind. I was wrong. I misled some folk. John Brown could be a member of my organization. That's what he said when he got off the plane. You see, that's what growth is all about. That's what learning how to die is all about. That's what maturation is all about, development is all about. And we could say the same thing about a whole host of other folk, and we could say this in regard to the movements of our Asian brothers and sisters with the Chinese exclusion acts and the ways in which they've had to come to terms. What happened to our Japanese brothers and sisters with the executive order in the 1940s, so forth and so on. It's a human thing. But there's no doubt in my mind that the black freedom struggle has been the leaven in the American democratic loaf. And when that loaf gets stale, there's a good chance that the black freedom movement is getting stale. Yeah. And we're in a moment now where there's an attempt to revive it, you see. And that's one reason why so many young folk are on the move, and they see it right across the board. I mean, we know, for example, if the only American citizens could vote in 2016, Brother Bernie Sanders would have been in the White House. Under 35 years old. The majority of black youth were for Bernie Sanders. You wouldn't get that in corporate media because the older folk tied to the neoliberal patronage machine of Biden and company, you see. And they're the ones more likely to vote. And there's a long history behind that we can get into, you see. But the important thing is that that awakening is taking place, but that awakening must have the kind of deep moral and spiritual quality that connects to our deep humanity in the name of solidarity, predicated on that integrity and honesty and decency I was trying to talk about. Yeah. And that's a very, very fundamental contribution that the prophetic Christian gospel has always made in America, and the kind of contribution that the Cultural Soul Project will make.
Dr. Ross, I have a question for you. It's going to go a little bit off.
Sure. No, nothing's off, though, brother. Nothing's off. We jazz like.
Yeah, we're just going to be improvisational.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's move with the spirit.
All the blue notes, dissonance, flat notes.
Let's do it.
We just work it. We just work it.
So I'm going to play the keys, and I'm going to let you jump in with the horn.
Yes.
So this kind of thought may get me in trouble, so you may have to pull me out.
Wade in the water. God gonna trouble the water. No. You encounter God right there in the storm. That's what Nahum says, right in the storm, in the whirlwind. That's where the encounter is, in the trouble. So let's get in trouble.
Well, let me tell you, the first thing I was about to kind of ask you, and you hit it really, really strongly, is that the reason why we have a critique on whiteness as a socially constructed ideology and not just a full-on critique of white people is because we know people of color can perpetuate white supremacy ideology that's exactly right. As well.
That's right.
And oftentimes when you are from a city that is overly populated by what you would call vanilla people, there may be oftentimes a higher percentage of people of color who want to perpetuate that white supremacist ideology within a corporate context. And because I understand the allure, you get access to maybe some positions quicker, some administrative positions quicker, you get access to some material things.
That's right.
But it's like you said, to survive, they got to be well adjusted to injustice as opposed to maladjusted to that work.
That's right.
And so I think I read something or heard you speak in the past, talked about the kind of corporate niggerization of people of color and really seducing them into perpetuating that white supremacist ideology in the workplace. And I guess what I'm asking you, and this is what I want you to pull me out of, can we free some folk tonight, man, with a good message, man? Some folks need to be free. And so they need to be free. And I've done this work in particular type of settings and at high administrative levels And there are a lot of people who in their heart and in their spirit, they want to be maladjusted. They really do.
Want to cut against the grain.
They want to cut against the grain,
That's right.
but the system is so seductive in such a way that they stay on and play the game. One of the things, and this is just kind of a footnote, Dr. West said this a long time ago. He said there's two types of Negroes in America, those running free and those running scared. And you need to make up your mind which one you're going to be, because either way it goes, you're going to be running, right? So,
Lord, I wish I'd have put it so eloquently. I can tell you that. My dear brother's helping me out linguistically here.
So my question just for you and just for all people of colors, even though I like to look at it through the lens of the African-American experience, what do you say to those folks of color who in their spirit and in their belly, they do want to cut against the grain, but because of whatever, they are just going along to get along? And so can you just throw out some gems that can kind of free some folks, de-niggerize some folks?
I hear you. Brother Martin Luther King Jr. used to say that I'd rather be dead than afraid. I'd rather be dead than afraid. Gandhi, who was an absolute pacifist, used to say cowardliness is worse than violence. That's Gandhi. So we're back to courage again.
That's right.
You see. Now we also have to keep in mind, though, that none of us are able to have a control over other people's spirits. See, all we can do is plant seeds, and you see when it sprouts, and you have no control of the sprouting. We got teachers out here from kindergarten all the way through college, and you're in the sprouting business. You just planting these seeds, and some folks, you'd say, my God, 5 years later, they fired up, and they had no movement at all in your class for 4.5 months. And you said, I didn't know that seed was going to sprout like that. You don't say, because you're not in full control of it. You see, so when you bearing witness, there's no utilitarian calculus that allows you to keep control of the effects and consequences of what you're doing. You just want to make sure that your witness is a fruit of a love and joy inside of you that is bequeathing the best of the tradition to those precious young ones, you see. So in that sense, this sense of trying to ensure people are not just walk around scared and afraid and intimidated all the time. Now, this is more difficult in a white supremacist civilization precisely because they've made it so clear over 400 years that those black folk who are fully, thoroughly, most clearly free will be the prey of the powers that be. They will shoot you down in a minute because you become the example of freedom. So even your Jesus is going to be truncated and deodorized and sterilized and sanitized. It's going to look like Michelangelo's uncle, as if he's Italian, rather than Middle Eastern and Northern African Jewish brother. All of these are various ways of ensuring that Jesus in the temple running out the money changers is not available in a serious way. And really, I mean, one of the geniuses of the history of Christianity is the degree to which the gospel was able to get through most churches because of the truncation, because of the narrowness, because of the very, very rigid occupation with dogma, but very fearful of unleashing a life of love, being a disciple of such a love conductor as the Palestinian Jew named Jesus, you see. And of course, you're absolutely right. You know, Islam, prophetic Islam, fundamental. Right. Prophetic Judaism, fundamental. Prophetic Buddhism, like a bell hooks. We all know the great bell hooks, who's Buddhist, you see, or an Alice Walker, and so forth and so on, you see. And then there's our dear, precious secular brothers and sisters who just agnostic all the way down, atheistic all the way down. And you say, we are committed to truth and justice. And we have to remind ourselves that I don't know of any religious folk who are not in some way atheistic. Very important. See, for most Christians, for example, if the only Christian God they had access to was the God of the Ku Klux Klan, they would be atheistic. Because at the center of the legacy of Jerusalem is thou shalt have no other gods beside me. So you're going to be atheistic about those other gods. And sometimes those other gods are somebody's God. And you're atheistic about that one. But when it comes to a God of love, then we hold out.
That's right.
A God of justice has affected our lives based on our experience, changing and transforming us and so forth and so on. You see. So it's not as if somehow atheism in this capital A sense is some alien element in the history of any religion. There's some kind of rejection of God talk in every religious discourse. And what that means is a certain kind of humility.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes, a certain
absolutely.
kind of humility. Very much so. Very much so.
Dr. West, I want to talk about something else. If you follow Dr. West's writings, if you follow his talks, you always hear him talk about musicians and the impact that musicians have had on the world at large, but specifically within an American context. You talk about the genius of a John Coltrane. You talk about the genius of a Curtis Mayfield. You even, in one of your books, talked about how Sly Stone came to Shiloh Baptist Church and got on the organ and tore it apart.
Fifth Sunday,
You know,
Northern California mass choir genius from Vallejo. Of course, he comes out of the Pentecostal church. His brother has the largest black church in Vallejo right now. Freddie, who played that magnificent guitar in Sly's Family Stone. Yes, Sly, he was known as Sylvester at that time, you know.
Right.
But, oh, yeah.
when you say Vallejo in Portland to black folks, they think of E40, so you got to be very,
Oh,
very,
no, we love E40
you know,
too.
yeah, we love
Portland
E40. Loves E40.
Yeah,
Man.
that's
Portland
true.
loves
That's
E40.
true. But he comes later. See, I mean, it's interesting.
I'm teasing you on that.
But I
teasing
love
you,
that,
man.
though, brother. I love that because when you actually talk about hip hop, and of course God, I learned so much from you on this, and just listening to your lectures and things. That in reading you, that hip hop is connected to the kinetic orality and the passionate physicality that has been associated with black speech. But it also emerged at a time in which so many of the arts programs have been eliminated in the schools. So many of the talented young people didn't have access to instruments. So they had to use their voices and their tongues and their speech as forms of instrument and sample. So that the early waves of golden age of hip hop.
Right. That's right.
When you had real funk, you had James Brown. You know what I mean?
Hugely sampled. I want to.
You had
I want
George
to.
Clinton and Bootsy. And,
You know, I don't even know.
Yeah.
Hold on, I'm gonna bring us back because this is.
See, that's Rakim. But Rakim has this notion of sonic confidence.
Yeah.
I love that in his memoir.
Yeah.
Sonic confidence. The confidence in being able to make music, sonically express oneself, that has never been radically called into question on behalf of black people. They attacked our scientific intelligence. And all the universities and churches and mosques and journalists trying to convince the world that black people are less intelligent scientifically.
Right.
But when it comes to sonic confidence,
Right.
they ain't never messed with that.
Never.
And so it's no accident that has played a fundamental role in sustaining black self-respect and self-esteem and self-regard. Because the genius and the excellence cannot be called into question.
That's right.
And the greatest American music that has been created in this continental context, you got to have a whole wave, a whole parade of black people. And it got nothing to do with psychological sensitivity to inclusion and diversity.
That's right. That's right.
Ain't got nothing to do with that.
That's right.
You see. When Bex Beiderbecke comes from Iowa and sits at the feet of Louis Armstrong, who drops out in elementary school and says, I've been blowing my horn all these years. How do you hit that high C note? Let me show you how to do it, brother. Come on in. And that's Louis Armstrong's love. He's on the love train. Come on in, Bex. I know you're from the middle class. I know your mom and daddy might be upset with hanging out with us, but come on, Bex, and I'm going to take care of you too. Because he loved him. And they had a magnificent relationship. And that's just one of the whole myriad of relationships that had to do with meeting persons at the depth of their humanity as it connected to sonic expression, that sonic confidence. And you get that same sonic confidence in hip-hop. But the problem is, black folk have never run the industry.
It's corporate control.
Corporate, oligarchic,
through white
plutocratic,
interest.
sometimes organized crime, but usually the folk making most of the money.
That's right.
Can't sing a note, play a note, don't know hardly what a note is other than a money note. And that's exploitation across the board that we have too often.
But that's we're gonna talk about hip hop because it's the third tenet. Critical hip hop theory is the third tenet of the church.
Yeah, it's a crucial one.
But in many ways, like that's a metaphor for so much of the pseudo cultural work, right?
That's
right.
You
got corporate interests dictating the terms of what black authenticity looks like, and it exists in the white racist imagination of that white ideology, right? And it sells it back to us in its dysfunctional pathological form, and then we assess that as being some kind of authentic representations of ourselves. But I want to digress a little bit because we got a little bit of time, and I want to throw something really at you, and it's going to have all this
Well,
in
I tell you, let me just say this on personal
Yes,
grounds, though.
Absolutely.
Because, when we were making our 3 albums, and we had Prince, we had the great soul singer Gerald Levert, he and Glenn Jones, 2 of the towering figures in the history of soul music for their generation.
Absolutely.
We had Lenny Williams, we had, of course, we had Andre 3000, we had Jill Scott, we had Raw Digger, and Talib Kweli and myself started off the whole album. It's called Never Forget, came out 2007. For 3 years, we went all of the major labels, with all these towering figures. And keep in mind, Prince, genius that he was, never allowed one hip-hop artist to sample his music. Mm-hmm. But when we went to him, and I'm blessed to know him and spend time and travel with him, he said, oh yeah, Brother West, that's fine. He's Jehovah's Witness now. Now that, he's genius musically, but theologically, that's pretty tight. Things are tight now. Oh yeah, he's not no Holy Ghost Baptist like myself. He's real tight, but we love him no matter what. He got that from Larry Graham.
Right.
From Sly Stone.
Right.
Fly in the Family Stone is also Jehovah's Witness. But what would the labels say? They say, we don't want all of this spiritual crap. We want G-string music. I said, that's part of the spiritual warfare against my precious young brothers and sisters that we fight.
That's right.
That's precisely why we're fighting for the legacy of the Luther Vandrosses and Phyllis Hymans. That's precisely why we're fighting for the Donny Hathaways and others. Keep that legacy strong.
That's right.
Keep it strong. But when it's filtered through the oligarchs who only want a certain kind of hip-hop music, so that the Chuck D's and KRS-Ones and others begin to drop out.
Right.
I mean, thank God for J. Cole. Now, your stuff on J. Cole is wonderful, brother.
Oh, yeah, man. Yeah.
Oh,
I'm going to teach a class on J. Cole,
Jermaine Lamar.
Yeah.
Middle child.
Yeah.
Middle child. Oh, yeah.
So this is really, really profound. So when we talk about hip-hop through the church, oftentimes people think that just means that we're going to rap a sermon or something. It's really at that level. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Or if not, we're just going to kind of reflect what that kind of corporate, commodified, co-opted, and corrupted version of hip-hop is through the lens of, kind of that white corporate lens. But so I just want to tell you all this. When we talk about hip-hop, critical hip-hop theory through the Cultural Soul Project, the first thing we talked about is this kind of, remember, we're about inner city, urban America, and looking at the experiences of people of color. But we talk about hip-hop as a lived experience, a lived reality, and a cultural sensibility for those who have been shaped by life on the margins. And we also talk about how do those folks, right, who've been shaped by life on the margins, formulate and negotiate identity within that social and structural marginalization. And then, because I'm a Christian, I'm always a prisoner of hope. So how does hip-hop offer sites of hope, possibility, and resistance against not just social and structural, but psychological marginalization, right? And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that. I mean, you've already started the conversation, but one of the things you wrote that I thought was so powerful, and I'm paraphrasing it because I may miss a line here, but you said something to the effect, Dr. West, of music is every generation's truth. Music is every generation's truth. And so as much as you were so much inspired by, you know, Curtis Mayfield, James Brown, Sarah Bond, you know, I mean, the list goes on and on. Yeah, I mean, there are people who, you know, their critique of society is through the lens of a Kendrick Lamar. We're going to be all right.
That's a beautiful
thing.
What I mean? We got arrested to that song.
Yeah. You know,
we went to jail rhythmic. We went to jail courageous because of that song.
Yeah.
I salute that genius from Compton.
And one of the things that Dr. West always talks about is how do we think about the progressive strands of the culture. Right. And oftentimes when you let corporate media or corporate interests or kind of white fetishized versions of like people of color control the narrative, it is never as edifying, and it doesn't really, you know, bring the mobilization back to the people. It usually just keeps people's pockets the way that it needs to be. And here's a footnote. I always talk to people about this. You know, if you think about, I'll pick probably 3 of the richest rappers right now. Let me see, 3 of the richest rappers. So let's say Jay-Z, let's say Puff, and let's say Dre. So Dre, Puff, and Diddy as like 3 of the richest rappers that we have.
You're talking about rich monetarily.
Financially. So we're talking about Jay-Z.
Puff don't need to be in there artistically.
No. Right. We're talking about just financially.
That's right.
We're talking about just financially.
We're just talking about money. We're talking about financially. Love you, Diddy, but you know, we got to be honest.
I'm just talking about financially.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm talking about what Forbes would dictate. what Forbes would dictate.
I got you.
And the irony, but here's the irony of this, and I want everybody to hear this. The irony of their billions or 3/4 billions is never from music. It becomes the corporate consolidation of what they partner with. Right. Diddy is filthy rich off of Ciroc vodka, right? Dre is Beats by Dre, right? And Jay-Z is Tidal and Duce and all these kind of different things that you know, business ventures that he connects with. And again, to even borrow from Jay-Z, I'm not trying to knock his hustle or anybody. You know, I'm a fan of hip hop, and you know, and I critique it when I think it's retrograde, and then I exalt it when I think it has some transformative capabilities. But what would you say to people who their generation just isn't with the whole hip hop politic, and the idea of a church intersecting a hip hop sensibility for some people sounds like that is like, yeah, that's blasphemy. Right? That's blasphemy. What would you tell folks to just enlighten them about how an indigenous inner city cultural art form shaped in post-industrial America can provide some hope and possibility and a lived sensibility to the people?
What a wonderful question. Yeah. What a wonderful question. Yeah. Yes, indeed. One, though, we got to proceed on the notion that hip-hop is the lingua franca of young people all around the world.
Right.
The world has been Afro-Americanized. You can go to Latin America, Asia, Middle East, all of them got hip-hop movements, voices, artists, just like jazz and rhythm and blues and so forth. It's been Afro-Americanized, this empire and the whole world. So if you want to speak their language, and for young people who are too often unloved and uncared for, they're unchurched, they're unmosqued, they're untempled, they have no connection to any rich forms of transcendence. Music is the last form for them to get some distance from their pain.
That's right.
To transfigure their suffering into some way of sustaining themselves, even if it's a way of recycling the pain by the songs themselves being pain, because a song of pain is still distant from pain. Just like Beckett's Waiting for Godot. It's a play of despair, but it's not despair. It's distant from despair with Dee and Go-Go. That's what art does, you see. But what we'd say, especially to the older folk, is who you think Thomas Dorsey was playing that piano in Pilgrim's Baptist Church, to Mahalia Jackson singing, and Reverend J.C. Austin, the dancing preacher. He was break dancing and had hip-hop moves.
Right. The dancing preacher.
The dancing preacher. Thomas Dorsey writing the hits for Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith. And then his baby and his wife died the same day. He returns to the church where he came, and he writes Precious Lord, Take My Hand, Martin Luther King Jr.'s favorite song. Mm-hmm. He's moving between blues and church. Who do you think Rosetta Tharpe was playing her guitar? Who do you think Marianne Williams was the model for Aretha Franklin? Where did Ray Charles come from? You see, the church must engage the culture of the people in order for them to see the depths of the gospel and ensure that the bread of life is not rendered stale in the church. You speak to folk in order to get them to see that, lo and behold, there's a love available here that's going to change your life and turn your world upside down. So you have to be able to engage. Where do you think James Cleveland comes from? He couldn't play that way in the 1920s. They call that devil's music. Genius that he was. They called it then gospel music. That was very different than the hymns that were played before gospel music. Right. Then here come Kirk Franklin and all these folk, right? Yep. They trying to build on that tradition. That's right. But every tradition is always subject to the hijacking, the colonizing, the co-opting. When I grew up in the church, we didn't have praise teams, we had choirs. That's right. Mm-hmm. It's been a movement. Yeah. It's very important. That is. It's one of the reasons why black people, we can't even bury our dead with spiritual dignity these days. Because everybody wants to get in on the funeral because it's on C-SPAN, and they singing as if they trying to get a label rather than speaking to the pain of that precious body in that coffin for the family that's out there shedding tears. It's all performance, all spectacle. It's all image. That's right. It's not giving, surrendering, emptying. You see, we saw it with Aretha. We saw it with Whitney Houston. You can just see it over and over again. Can't even bury our dead with dignity no more. Right. We say, hey, we got family members. We got friends. This ain't about you got a big audience and you come in with all dressed like you in Madison Square Garden or something. Everybody got a political agenda. These are human beings wrestling with death. This ain't no plaything. Commodified. That's right. Hollywoodified. Yep. You see, typical again. And that was also true back then. I mean, every form has the possibility of being commodified. It's just that we live in a culture now where it's so hyper. People just can't wait. I get young folk coming up to me all the time. Brother West, I found out what my brand was. What is your brand? I say, I ain't got no damn brand. I got a cause. Right. I got a cause. I don't have a brand. That's right. What are you willing to live and die for? Well, no, I got a brand because it's a market strategy that allows me to find that niche so I can be successful and a celebrity. Oh, that's not the black freedom struggle. Malcolm, Martin, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Ella Baker didn't have a brand, they had a cause. They had a vision. The kingdom of God is not a brand. Amen. The black freedom struggle is not a sustained commercial. It will be commodified. Right. They got Marvin Gaye now on commercials selling soap and other commodities. Right. He said, dang. Boy, these capitalists are so creative when it comes to making money. But when it comes to what is a cause tied to a calling, not just a career. Yeah, a vocation. A vocation, not just a profession. And that's what young people are hungry and thirsty for. That's why the timing of your project here in Portland is so important. Because young folk these days, they want what Ashford and Simpson called the real thing. Right. They don't want no semblance, simulacrum, and imitation. They hungry for the real thing. Absolutely. And in the end, as my brother Cliff West always reminds me, he said, he said, the genuine article, the real thing, love, commitment to the welfare of others, it can never fully go out of fashion. Never. There's always going to be a slice of the species that says our souls are empty even when we have all of the material possessions we have. What does it profit a man or woman
To
to
gain
gain the whole world
and lose there.
and lose? So what does it profit for a nation?
Yeah.
To dominate the whole world, the biggest military in the world. Everybody looks to you when it comes to foreign policy, and you're losing your soul. That's why Martin Luther King Jr. founded the SCLC, and the theme of SCLC was what? To redeem the soul of America. What did Malcolm X say? America ain't never had no soul. That's an interesting dialogue. It's true. You got to be Socratic about that. Malcolm, what you mean? Let me tell you about America's expansionism, imperialism, and so forth and so on. But Malcolm, what about all of these folk who are still decent people? What about these people who you know are supporting of you, willing to live and die? These various movements of different colors and so forth. What about them, Malcolm? Well, I guess they are America, but they're not at the center of America. Okay, you're going to have to attenuate your claim. You got to attenuate your claim. It's wait until the whole nation becomes holistically fascistic. Right. Then it ain't got no soul whatsoever. Now, it might go fascist and throw the rest of us in jail. So the soul of America would just be incarcerated. Again, that's right. That's exactly right. Because there's been freedom struggles and black freedom struggles. Well, so many of our precious ones went to jail.
That's right.
Mumia Abu-Jamal and others still in jail. That's exactly right.
Well, one of the things I want to say very quickly is, and this was not even crafted, but you know, the mission of the Cultural Soul Project is to transform society and culture through the soul of the people. We want to make sure the soul is centered as well. Dr. West, I want to say this, and Dr. West is so kind to kind of stay a little bit longer, but we're going to start wrapping this up. Depending on what day you ask me, if you ask me what my favorite movie is, you'll either get, depending on what day, you'll either get Brown Sugar or Love Jones. It just depends on what day you ask me.
Yes.
You know. But for today, it's Brown Sugar. All right, so, and if you've watched Brown Sugar, raise your hand if you've seen the movie Brown Sugar. Okay, so right on. One of the things that Sanaa Lathan's character would always ask people when she interviewed them was, when did you first fall in love with hip hop? That was the thing that she would always ask people. And if you came to the last Cultural Soul Project event, you know how I end my conversations. And it's not gonna stop because Dr. West is here. I'm gonna always ask people who are their top favorite 5 rappers and why. And then I give mine and we can fight on stage in front of everybody, you know, but I wanna ask you first, who are your top favorite 5 rappers?
Rappers. Well, let me first say that I fell in love with hip-hop in 1975, and I used to go to Wednesday night to the Apollo, and they had a brother named DJ Hollywood. And they would bring him in between the Whispers and in between Teddy Pendergrass and some of the others. Wow. And everybody wondered, what is this little Negro doing? He was just rapping, and we had never heard of him. This is 4 years before Sugar Hill Gang.
Yeah.
So, but in New York, it had already become rather widely available on the street.
That's right.
And so when I saw it, I loved it. I said, dang, you know, I like that. I like that. Now, I had gone to, of course, many Gil Scott-Heron and the Last Poets and other towering artists who had done similar things.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no, I think Rakim is an artistic genius of unparalleled status. And when you're 18 years old and you do lyrics of fury, that's like Cold Sweat James Brown in April 1967, which creates a fissure in time in terms of funk. That's like Giant Steps by John Coltrane, 1959. But he did it at 18 years old. Right. That's like Curtis Mayfield writing, I'm So Proud, and Gypsy Woman when he's 16. Man. That's a level of genius it's just hard to imagine. Right. So Rakim, for me, is out there way on his own. Okay. Now then, as I talked before, you know, when I was at the House of Lord Pentecostal Church with National Black United Front, the great Reverend Herbert Daltrey, we founded the Timbuktu Learning Center. And I used to lecture every Wednesday night there in Brooklyn, 415 Atlanta Avenue. And there was a young brother sitting on the front row, 10 years old. His name was Tupac Shakur. And he was there every week with his mother, Finney, who was a member of the Black Panther Party and a member of the House of Lord Pentecostal Church. And there's something about Tupac that always got inside of me. I could already see the unbelievable intensity in his eyes every week. I'm this 10-year-old brother sitting up there, and I'm sitting up there talking about philosophy and so forth. And he's just right there. I said, oh, if the Lord could use a cracked vessel like me just to provide a little seed, let him go on down to Baltimore. Let him go on to Oakland and Los Angeles and so forth. So Tupac would be number 2.
Okay.
Biggie number 3.
No.
Andre 3000. Lord, I love that brother. That's a good question, number 5. It's hard to say. It's a lot of contenders.
That 5 spot is always hard.
I mean, you got Missy and you got Queen Latifah and the others. I don't want the sisters to be completely pushed back in this regard. No, not at all. They got great genius too, definitely. Lauren, oh my God, Miseducation. That's true too. That's true too. But I must say in all honesty, when it comes to Sarah Vaughan, Carmen McRae, Ella Fitzgerald, and Billie Holiday, when it comes to Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, when it comes to Ben Webster, and the one and only John Coltrane himself, I tell these young folk, yes, you got a genius, but you are standing on the shoulders of giants. Now that reflects my own generation. So I try to be open to the young folk, but I tell them, if I want somebody to touch my soul at the deepest level, right, it's not going to be hip-hop artists all the time. Right. No, I'm going for something mellow. Don't touch me so I can groove and keep my groove moving. But that's generational. That's generational.
I want to say a couple things. And
that's the dramatics and the delphonics and things.
In the back, I want you all to start queuing up the music in a second, and because we're about to wrap it up, and if we can do this right, I curated some beautiful music for the after event for you. I had you in mind and some things I think would make sense. But you know, there's always going to be a generational gap with when people talk about music, or it's just a subjective interpretation of hip-hop. But for today, and my list changes daily. It depends on what mood I'm in. But it's like, I don't even want to tell mine now, man. You hit Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan.
What would be your 5, though? What would be your 5?
I think today, my 5 is, I have to start with Jay-Z. I think my algorithm for what I think a successful rapper is, and longevity and shaping of the culture, and I don't think you'll ever see a rapper that lasts as long as Jay-Z and still has the tenaciousness and the lyrical things that he has. But I would say Jay-Z. Mm-hmm. This is a very tough one, especially in a crowd like today. I can already know I'm about to get some arrows for this, but I'm gonna get this.
That's all right. You speak your truth, brother.
But I'm not. This is pre-Kim Kardashian, right? This is pre-Kim Kardashian. I think Kanye. I understand. I mean. This is my truth. This is my truth.
I'm with you. Speak your truth, brother. Speak your truth.
I think Kanye.
That Negro might be my cousin for all I know.
I think Kanye, his earlier albums were some of the most beautiful,
he's
complicated rap that's ever come out.
He's lyrical genius.
I think
so is Jay-Z. Both of them lyrical genius.
I think third for me, and these are kind of personal, because music for me, if you listen to what Dr. West talks about, music for me is like, what is the backdrop? What is the soundtrack of my life when I'm driving home?
Right,
what can help me kind of process the contradictions of social life? And I can see myself in it, right? So I would say Jay, Ye, Common. Common is my guy, man.
Common is serious.
Yeah,
yes, he is.
Common. Right now, if you all know hip-hop and you really follow it, my 4th is Black Thought.
Oh, yeah.
Black Thought is a genius, man.
No, he's on my album, too.
Yeah, Black Thought is a genius.
You're right about that.
And I think today, just because
There's so many of them.
I want to bring in somebody in kind of today's generation. And if you really look at if you look at, the catalog of the work, Kendrick Lamar. I got to go with Kendrick Lamar.
Already?
I got to go, yeah. Kendrick's first 3 albums.
He's still in process.
I know,
His genius is undeniable, but he got along.
But think about this, Well, I don't want to turn this into a
butterfly,
but no,
you can hit your
I would
heart.
just say I want to rep this newer generation, and I think for this newer generation, Kendrick is to a lot of folks what
and
what Pac was to us, and what all those kind of different.
What about Rakim, though, man?
Yeah. Listen, let me tell you, I respect. If you ask me who do I think were the top influential rappers in the game
in the first wave,
I got to, of course, Rakim, But if you ask what left the impact on me, then I got to give you those folks that I said.
That's fair.
Well, let me just say this to y'all really quickly. Can y'all give it up for Dr. Cornel West?
Give it up for Daymond Glenn.
Thank you, man.
And the Glenn family. Absolutely. Oh, Lord, this has been rich, man. It's been rich.